here to join us today is Lena Cebula. She's a best-selling author with a new book called Miraculous. And she's also a social justice advocate, public speaker, podcast host, a certified life coach, and as a trafficking survivor, Lena shares the good news of God's love while raising awareness about the reality of human trafficking. So thank you so much, Lena, for joining us today. It's such a blessing to have you.
Thank you, Emily, for having me.
So you share your story in your book, but why don't you share a little bit about it today? Can you tell us how you went from being trafficked to finding freedom?
Absolutely. First of all, I could have never imagined that after 20 years of silence, this is what I'm going to be doing publicly, sharing my story, speaking on stages in front of hundreds of people, because I thought I have a story of shame, guilt, and condemnation. But now I know this is God's story of salvation, of overcoming adversity and thriving after trauma. So a little bit about my background. I was born and raised in USSR. And that time we reside in Ukraine. So my parents already struggled in their marriage. They became an alcoholics, lost well-paid jobs, and really struggle in poverty, trying to survive. So my home always been full of strangers. They brought booze and drugs, but they brought food as well. So that's how I ended up mingling around, and I became an easy target for those guys. And I was abused and raped in the basement of my own apartment numerous times. So when I thought things couldn't get any worse, 1 month before my 15th birthday, I wake up in severe abdominal pain. I was scared and confused because I actually was in labor. I delivered the baby and I didn't know who her father was. I didn't even know that I was pregnant. So my baby died 3 months later from health complications. And that's how I ended up having anxiety, panic attacks. And I looked for something to medicate my pain. I found heroin, drugs, alcohol, because it was easier to be high than feeling worthless, abandoned, and broken.
Right.
And then one day, oh my goodness, I met this lady. She was wealthy and compassionate, and she treated me like a human because I was street junkie. There was no hopes, no dreams for me.
Right.
But she invited me to her home, offered me coffee and sweets, and I was so impressed. And that's when she offered me a job. And I was so excited because I was eager to escape my life. So that nice, rich-looking lady sold me into human trafficking into foreign country. So I ended up being in the brothel in Israel for almost 2 years. But one of my bodyguard in the brothel in Israel shared the gospel with me. And actually I was sharing this story about God, and it was so different than like anyone ever thought, like, or told me the stories about God.
Yeah.
And but what was interesting about this gentleman, it's like all his demeanor, because the men in my life, they angry, they drunk, they abusive. So actually he was just good. And even in those moments, he brought me to Jerusalem to pray at the Wailing Wall. So from the brothel, dragatic, alcoholic, I ended up asking God for favor, and he answered my prayer. So that's what triggered me to live this life. But then I end up on drugs and alcohol again in Ukraine, because, like, honestly, never leave this kind of situation alive unless you have been rescued. This is again God's story. I end up back at home, couldn't find anyhow to fit in, sold myself again in human trafficking because my body was the commodity. That's all I knew. And I end up in Canada. But in Canada, I start from the new slate. I actually escaped the trafficking, got into cosmetology credit school. I was a hairstylist for 16 years. I got married. I got my 3 beautiful children. But little caveat in that marriage too, the boy that I married was pastor's son. So I ended up in the church with him just to make his parents like me. And that's where I heard the salvation message and give my life
Again.
to Christ.
Wow.
And that's where story began of
Mhm.
the healing and redemption and belonging and peace. Oh my goodness. Number one, like God give me peace.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then he support me through all this life.
And you talk all about your story and your journey through your book, Miraculous. So it's a difficult story to share. So how challenging was it to write this story in your book?
Thank you for asking this question because honestly, were moments that I have to step back and step away for months, and I
Mm,
couldn't come back because I didn't want anyone to know this.
right.
But what's interesting though, before my husband, like after he proposed, before he married me, I wrote him a letter because I want him to choose me because I knew I didn't deserve
Right.
mercy and marriage and home and family
Yeah.
and love. But he chose not to read that letter. So I thought this story never gonna come out. So I
Mm,
created this persona. I was a salon owner. I was mother of three. I was volunteering in church. I was so active. I was successful, so that's what people saw. But every time they ask me about my story, I kind of lie
mm,
because I create that story. So God spoke to me and said, you're lying. So I
mm.
actually agreed to write and share my story just because I want to be obedient to him.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he was so faithful to me. So through all the process of writing the book, all I heard he saying to me, just trust me.
Mm,
Whoever loves you will never leave you. And through all of this time that I'm speaking, that's what happened.
yeah.
Nobody ever like shame me and belittle me like or anything. The people just love on me,
Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
was such an amazing. Like it's brought me so much freedom and
Yeah.
healing.
Yeah, and your story has definitely brought freedom and healing to others as well, and
Absolutely,
lets others know that they're not alone, right? That everybody um, has somebody that they can reach out to. So thank you so much for sharing your story through your
absolutely,
book, for sharing your story today, and letting know maybe those who have been victims of human trafficking that they are not alone and that
absolutely,
God is with them throughout it as well. So thank you for sharing
absolutely.
today.
Thank you.
Well, if you want more information on Lena or her book, Miraculous, you can head to 700club.ca.